Amari Turner had been taught that if you worked hard, stayed respectful, and kept your head up, doors would open. But in Fairhill, that door always seemed to open just a crack. It was the kind of town that wore its pride like a perfectly pressed blazer, clean, orderly, polite. Flags flew high, lawns stayed neat, and everyone knew everyone. But beneath that surface was a quiet code, passed down in glances and carefully chosen words. And when the Turners moved into the corner house on Oak Ridge Lane, the code had been broken. Amari was 13, sharp-eyed, well-spoken, and observant beyond his years. His mother used to say he had an old soul, the kind that caught things other people missed. And Fairhill Middle School gave him plenty to notice. The building itself was beautiful. Brick walls, tall windows, banners that read, "Excellence." Through tradition, Amari had never been to a school with smart boards in every classroom or lunch that came with choices. But the difference wasn't in the tools. It was in the way people looked at him when he raised his hand. He was always polite, always said sir and ma'am. He made friends quickly the first week, until their parents found out where he lived and who his dad was. David Turner didn't speak much. He moved like someone who had learned to carry pain in silence, a limp in his right leg that told a story he never offered. He wore plain clothes, showed up early to everything, and always sat in the back during school events. Not because he wasn't proud, but because he never needed the spotlight. At the first parent-teacher meeting, Amari sat outside the office, waiting while his dad met with Principal Emery. Emery had the kind of presence that filled a room, not because of warmth, but because of certainty. His tie was always tight, his handshake firm, his voice steady. He didn't speak to you, he spoke over you, with just enough courtesy to mask the condescension. The meeting was supposed to be a routine check-in. Amari was doing well, top of the class in math, organizing classmates for a community cleanup day, even helping tutor one of the struggling students in history. But the tone of the meeting shifted quickly. "I must say," Emery began, leaning back in his chair, "Amari certainly has potential, a bit energetic at times, but I suppose that comes with the background." David gave a polite nod. "We're proud of him." "Yes, well," Emery continued, folding his hands, "students from certain, shall we say, transient families often struggle with discipline or academic focus. It's nice to see him exceeding expectations." David's jaw tightened, just slightly. Emery smiled. "What do you do, Mr. Turner?" "I don't believe we've had the chance to speak much." "I'm retired," David said calmly. "Army." "Oh," Emery blinked. "Military, I see." He paused, then let out a short laugh. "Well, nothing wrong with honest work. Glad to have you here. Though I imagine it's quite a shift, from base life to Fairhill." David didn't flinch. "We've lived all kinds of places." "Yes," Emery said, glancing down at the file. "It'll be interesting to see how Amari adjusts. But for now he's doing just fine. You've done well for someone like yourself." The comment hung in the air like a slow drop of ink in a glass of water, spreading without a sound. David looked at him, face unreadable. He didn't argue, didn't correct, just nodded once more, shook Emery's hand, and walked out. Amari stood up when his father stepped into the hallway. He had a hopeful look on his face. "Everything good?" "Yeah," David said with a quiet smile. "You're doing great. Keep it up." But something was different in his eyes, something Amari hadn't seen before. A quiet flicker of hurt, maybe, or something older. On the walk home, Amari didn't speak much. Neither did his father. But that night, long after the lights were out, Amari sat up in bed and whispered to the ceiling. What did he mean by someone like yourself? And though he couldn't answer it yet, the question planted itself deep. Because that was the moment Amari realized his father wasn't just being quiet to keep the peace. He was holding back something. Something the town didn't see. Something bigger than silence. The next week brought more of the same. Amari sat in the front row of Mrs. Cranston's English class, answering questions thoughtfully, offering to help pass out papers, doing everything right. But every time he raised his hand, the teacher paused just a second too long, like she was weighing whether to call on him or someone else. By Friday, he had stopped volunteering answers. At lunch, he sat at a table near the corner of the cafeteria. It wasn't assigned, but it might as well have been. On his first day, he'd eaten with 3 boys who laughed at his jokes and liked that he was good at chess. But now they nodded at him from a distance and sat elsewhere. When one of them, Ethan, passed by on his way to dump his tray, Amari asked if they were still hanging out after school. Ethan hesitated. "My mom said we're busy," Amari tried to smile. "All good?" Ethan looked a little sorry, but not sorry enough to change anything. That evening, his mother asked how school was. Amari shrugged and said, "Fine." He didn't want to tell her about the weird looks or the way the teachers always complimented his manners, like they were surprised. He didn't want to tell her about how Principal Emery looked at his dad like he'd wandered into the wrong building. Instead, he asked about dinner, and she let it go. That Sunday, their family sat in the 3rd pew at the local church. It was a small building with white siding and a rusting steeple bell. The congregation was friendly, on the surface. Smiles at the door, handshakes in the aisle, whispered greetings. But nobody sat beside them. When the pastor asked newcomers to stand and introduce themselves, David rose and said simply, "David Turner, this is my wife Janine and our son Amari. We're new in town." The pastor smiled and thanked them, but afterward nobody asked them to stay for coffee. Outside, as they walked to their car, Amari caught sight of a man in khakis whispering to his wife. He didn't hear the words, but he saw the smirk. The wife glanced at them, then quickly looked away. Amari clenched his fists. Back home, he sat in his room and stared out the window. Why did everything feel like it came with a silent rule? You can be here, but not too much. You can do well, but not better than their kids. You can exist, but not belong. Later that night, as his father sat alone in the garage fixing an old radio, Amari finally asked, "Why don't you say anything?" David looked up. "About what?" "About how they treat us." David wiped his hands with a rag, thinking. "Because I've said it before," he said, "to people like them, and it didn't change anything." Amari frowned. "So you just let it happen?" "No," his father said softly. "I choose what to respond to. That's not the same as letting it happen." Amari didn't reply. He didn't understand it yet, but something about the way his dad spoke, with weight in every word, stuck with him. Like the silence wasn't weakness. It was choice, and behind it, something powerful, something waiting. Amari's name was on the morning announcements. That alone felt surreal. He had been nominated for the Emerging Student Leadership Award, a school-wide recognition given to one middle school student each year. The nomination came after he organized a neighborhood food drive that collected over 700 cans for a local shelter, an effort he led with late nights, hand-drawn flyers, and knocking on doors with his dad. Should have been a good day, but good days didn't last long in Fairhill. After class, a few kids patted him on the back. One said, "Didn't know we could get nominated for stuff like that." Amari smiled, pretending not to hear the second half of the sentence. "Like that." By lunch, whispers started. The smiles faded. In the hallway outside the teacher's lounge, Amari bent down to tie his shoe. The door cracked open just enough for voices to slip through. "I'm just saying." The food drive was probably his father's idea. Well, sure. Military types like to look good on paper. Right? No way a kid like that came up with it on his own. His father's probably a janitor or something. They move around a lot, don't they? Laughter, low and casual, the kind that stung more because it wasn't even angry. It was just normal to them. Amari stood slowly, heart pounding in his chest. He didn't make a sound, just walked away. That afternoon, he sat through history class without raising his hand. He knew the answer. He always did. But the voice in his head whispered, "They think your ideas don't belong to you." The next morning, his name was no longer on the announcement board. No mention of the award, no explanation. Nothing. Amari waited until lunch to ask Mrs. Garland, the student advisor, about it. She looked uncomfortable, tugging at her necklace as she searched for the right words. There were some concerns about how the nomination process was handled, she said. It seems a few steps may have been skipped. Skipped? Amari asked, confused. I followed all the guidelines. You signed the form. Yes, well, she said quickly. Principal Emery thought it best to review everything. We'll try again next semester. She offered him a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You've still got a bright future, Amari. Don't let this discourage you. But it did. It discouraged him deeply. That night, he didn't say much at dinner, pushed his food around on the plate. His mother asked how school was, and he mumbled, "Fine." But David watched him closely. Later, as they stood side by side brushing their teeth, David asked, "Something happened today?" Amari shrugged. "Just school stuff." David nodded, rinsed his mouth, and placed the toothbrush down. "You sure?" "I'm good," Amari said, avoiding eye contact. David studied him for a moment longer, but instead of pressing, he just said, "All right. If you ever need to talk, I'm here." Amari nodded, but inside everything was unraveling. The following days passed like shadows, quiet, cold, and heavy. Amari stopped sitting near the front of the class. He kept his head low, only answering when called. Even his writing, once full of fire and curiosity, lost its voice. He turned in assignments on time but never raised questions. Teachers barely noticed. One afternoon, he stood alone by the vending machine, watching the hallway empty after the final bell. A group of kids passed by laughing. One of them glanced at him and muttered, "Guess trophies aren't for everybody." Amari stared at the machine like it held all the answers. He didn't push the button. He just walked away. At home, his silence deepened. He barely touched his dinner. When his mother asked about his day, he smiled weakly and said, "It was okay," then excused himself. David watched from the other side of the table, quiet but aware. Later that evening, Amari sat on the edge of his bed, arms crossed, mind racing. He felt like a stranger in his own body. Nothing felt good anymore. Not his books, not his sketchpad, not even chess, which used to bring him peace. He opened his drawer and pulled out the essay he had written for the leadership nomination. He read the title, "Leadership is Showing Up When It's Hard." His own words now felt like a lie. Down the hall, he heard footsteps. The creak of the garage door, the soft click of a light turning on. He followed. David stood hunched over his workbench, gently oiling a fishing reel. The air smelled of old wood, motor oil, and something quiet. Amari watched him for a minute, then spoke. "Why do you let people talk down to you?" David didn't turn around. "Excuse me?" he asked softly. "You just take it," Amari said, stepping closer. "You let them act like you're invisible, like you don't matter. You let them treat me like I'm nothing, and you say nothing." David set the reel down and slowly faced him. "I'm not letting anyone treat you like nothing." "Well, it feels like it," Amari's voice cracked. "They talk about you like you're nobody. They took that award from me like I didn't earn it, and you just keep your head down like it doesn't matter." David's face didn't shift. His eyes were calm but steady, focused. Then he said, "Some people don't need to shout to lead." Amari's brow furrowed. "But sometimes it feels like you're hiding." David looked at him long and hard, then said, "Maybe I am. But not because I'm afraid, because I'm choosing the moment. Not every fight is won with fists. Some, you win by standing." Amari didn't understand it fully, not yet, but the way his father said it, low, grounded, like a truth carved from stone, stayed with him. "I wish I knew who you were before all this," Amari said, almost whispering. David reached over and flipped off the light. "Maybe it's time you did." That night, long after his parents went to bed, Amari found himself standing in the hallway staring at the coat closet. He opened it slowly. Shoes, coats, a box labeled, "Garage, Don't Touch." He reached behind it and found another box. Taped shut, but old, worn at the corners. He dragged it into his room, His fingers trembled as he peeled back the tape. Inside was fabric, dark, pressed, folded tight. He pulled it out, layer by layer, until the stars and bars revealed themselves, until the patches glimmered faintly under the light, until the name tag read, Turner D. Beneath the uniform, he found medals, rows of them, some faded, others still gleaming. Amari sat back, stunned. The man who never raised his voice, who stood in the back of rooms, who let people believe what they wanted, was a decorated soldier, a leader, a protector, a hero. And yet not once had he told that story. Amari stared at the uniform on his lap, heart pounding, eyes wide, because now he understood. His father hadn't been hiding. He'd been waiting. Amari stopped raising his hand altogether. Even when he knew the answer, especially when he knew it, he sat still, eyes fixed on his desk, like it had something more important to say. At lunch, he wandered the edge of the cafeteria until he found an empty seat near the far wall. The noise around him buzzed with energy, but it didn't touch him. Laughter, inside jokes, whispers he pretended not to hear. The boys who used to sit beside him, Ethan, Jacob, Milo, they didn't even look his way anymore. When he passed them in the hallway, their eyes slid right past him like he was part of the wall. Maybe their parents had said something. Maybe they were just scared to be seen with the wrong kid. It didn't matter. The silence hurt more than any words could. Each day felt longer than the one before. The energy he once brought to school, the curiosity, the leadership, the spark, faded into something hollow. He started skipping lunch, claimed he wasn't hungry. Sometimes he went to the library, pretending to read. Other times he sat in the bathroom stall with his knees pulled to his chest, counting the seconds until the bell rang. Back home, he said he was tired, said he had homework, said nothing when his mother asked if he was okay. But at night, when the house grew quiet and the weight of the day pressed down on him, Amari's thoughts circled the same question over and over again. Why do I feel like I have to be perfect just to be treated like I belong? He remembered his dad at every school event, standing in the back, nodding silently, never taking up space. Always there, always quiet. He used to think that was strength, but now he wasn't sure. One night, while lying in bed staring at the ceiling, a memory surfaced, faint and flickering. He was 6 years old. Veterans Day parade. The town square in another city that looked a lot like this one. He had been on David's shoulders, waving a little flag. The marching band played something loud and proud, and then came the soldiers. A group of older men stood along the sidewalk. When David passed by, still in uniform, still upright and strong, they saluted him. Every single one of them. At the time, Amari didn't understand what that meant. Now he did, and it only made the silence harder to carry. Next afternoon, after school, Amari came into the garage and found his father sitting at his workbench. Oiling a wrench, Amari dropped his backpack at the door. You let them walk all over us. David looked up, calm but not surprised. I don't let anyone walk over me. You don't say anything. That doesn't mean I'm weak. Amari stepped forward, voice cracking slightly. They took everything from me. They erased me like I didn't earn anything. And you just keep pretending like it's fine. David set the wrench down and wiped his hands slowly. You think speaking up always fixes things? I think saying, "Nothing is worse." David stood steady and firm. You don't know what I've had to stay silent through. Amari's chest rose and fell. So teach me. David looked at the old footlocker in the corner. His eyes lingered on it for a moment too long. Then he turned off the light and walked past his son. The footlocker stayed closed. That night, Amari couldn't sleep. The house was quiet, but his mind wasn't. Every word left unsaid, every smile. That turned cold. Every quiet moment where he'd swallowed how he felt kept echoing inside him like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. He sat up, turned on the small desk lamp, and stared at the empty notebook on his shelf. It had been a birthday, gift from his grandmother, months before they moved. He hadn't touched it, Didn't want to mess it up. Now it was the only thing that felt honest. He opened it slowly. The pages were clean, crisp, unwritten. He picked up a pen and held it for a long time. Then, without planning or thinking, he started to write. They said my dad is a nobody. But they don't know he's the reason some people are still alive today. The word surprised him, but he kept going. They took my award because they couldn't believe someone like me could earn it without help. But I did. I did the work. I stayed late. I asked for nothing. His hand moved faster now, emotions spilling, like water breaking through a dam. They laughed behind closed doors because they didn't see me standing there. But I heard it all. I hear it every day, in their pauses, their fake smiles, their nervous glances. His eyes welled up, but he didn't stop. I used to think staying quiet made me strong, but silence isn't strength when it comes from fear. By the time he looked up, 5 pages were filled. He read the last line he had written. I don't know who I am to them, but I know who I am to me. He exhaled slowly. It didn't fix everything, but it gave shape to what had felt so shapeless. Writing didn't erase the pain. It didn't make the whispers disappear, but it gave him something they couldn't take. His story. The next morning, he didn't walk into school with his head high. Not yet, but he didn't keep it down either. He moved through the halls quieter than usual, his notebook tucked into his backpack like armor. During lunch, he sat alone again, but this time, he opened the notebook and kept writing. He wrote about how people assume, how they whisper, how they erase, and he wrote about his dad, not as the man who stayed quiet, but as the man who stood strong in a world that didn't always know how to listen. It was during 7th period when everything began to shift. Ms. Carmen Jennings had only been at Fairhill for 2 years, but most students already knew she was different. Her voice carried calm authority. Her eyes saw more than most teachers noticed, and her classroom smelled like peppermint and paper. She taught history, but not the kind that made you memorize dates. With her, history felt alive, personal, uncomfortable even. That day, Amari lingered at the back of the room after the final bell. Ms. Jennings looked up from her desk. Amari, something on your mind? He hesitated, then stepped forward and placed the notebook on her desk. I've been writing, he said quietly. Not for class, just writing. She looked at the cover. It was worn now, the edges bent, the pages full. Can I read it? Amari shrugged. Sure. He didn't wait for her reaction. He left before she could turn the first page. The next day, she stopped him in the hallway. Come by after school, she said gently. Please. He showed up, nervous, unsure what he was walking into. But she didn't lecture. She didn't grade. She simply held up the notebook. This is important, she said. It's not just personal. It's powerful. Amari looked down. It's just what happened. She shook her head. It's more than that. It's what most people won't say out loud. He didn't know how to respond. She slid a flyer across the desk. The school is holding an essay contest. Theme is legacy. I think you've already written something better than anything they're expecting. Amari's brow furrowed. You want me to turn in this? Not all of it, she smiled. But there's a story in there. One that needs to be told. He looked at the flyer. He looked at the notebook. And for the first time in weeks, he felt something stir inside, small but strong. Hope. Over the weekend, Amari rewrote everything. He didn't name names. He didn't point fingers. He told a story. It was about a boy who tried to fit in, who worked hard, who got erased, and whose father, the quiet man everyone ignored, carried a legacy too heavy for medals and too deep for words. He titled it, The Man They Didn't See. On Monday morning, he printed it out and handed it to Ms. Jennings. She read it during lunch. When she reached the final paragraph, her eyes blurred. She took off her glasses and whispered, Sometimes people hide greatness to protect it. 2 days later, Ms. Jennings caught Amari by his locker before homeroom. Her eyes were bright, too bright to be hiding anything. You won, she said, barely above a whisper. The essay contest. Amari, you won. He blinked. Seriously? She nodded. The panel picked it unanimously. A weight lifted off his shoulders. He felt it in his chest, in his breath. Like for once, the truth had reached people who were willing to hear it. But there's something you should know. The lightness disappeared. Principal Emery hasn't announced it, she said. He said the school would honor someone else. At Friday's assembly, someone more fitting for public recognition. Amari felt the floor shift beneath him. What? I confronted him, she added, voice steady but sharp. He said you'd get a quiet certificate in the mail. No speech, no mention, just a line in the newsletter. Amari looked away. Of course, he should have known. Ms. Jennings placed a hand on his shoulder. I've already written to the board. If he doesn't do the right thing, I will. Amari didn't respond. He didn't trust his voice. That night, at dinner, he barely touched his food. David glanced at him once, then again. You all right? Amari hesitated, then shook his head. I won the essay contest, he said. His mother smiled. That's amazing, baby. Amari looked at his father. They're not going to announce it. David's expression didn't change. Amari pushed back. From the table. Why do they always win? No matter what we do, how quiet we are, how hard we work, it's like we're not allowed to be seen. David stood, walked to the counter, and refilled his glass with water. Amari watched him. Who were you before all this? He asked, his voice trembling. David turned slowly. He met Amari's eyes. Then he nodded just once. Come to the ceremony. Wear your best. Bring your questions. The auditorium buzzed with low chatter. Parents filled the folding chairs with carefully pressed clothes and polite smiles. Teachers lined the back walls. The front row was reserved for special guests, though no one seemed to know who they were. An American flag hung behind the podium, lit by soft stage lights. Amari sat near the back wearing a button-down shirt his mom had ironed 3 times. He kept his hands clasped in his lap. His father sat beside him, still unreadable, dressed in a dark gray suit with polished shoes. His face gave nothing away. Principal Emery stepped to the podium, clearing his throat into the mic. Good morning, families, staff, and students. Today we honor the values of tradition, character, and community. These awards reflect our commitment to excellence in all its forms. Amari stared at the floor. He already knew what was coming. Emery continued. For this year's Legacy Essay Contest, we had many strong entries, but one stood out for its passion, clarity, and relevance. Amari's breath caught. For a second, he dared to believe. Emery smiled tightly. We'd like to recognize Rachel Simmons for her thoughtful essay on family values. Polite applause followed. A girl in a floral dress stood and walked toward the stage. Amari didn't move. He just felt everything inside him slowly shut down. But then, the back doors opened. The sound wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. Deliberate footsteps followed. People turned. Some whispered. A tall, broad-shouldered black man entered wearing full U.S. Army dress blues. His medals caught the light with every step. He moved with authority, with grace. He walked straight down the center aisle as if the stage were his destination, but he didn't stop at the podium. He stopped in front of David Turner and saluted. The room fell into stunned silence. Permission to speak on behalf of a hero, Sergeant Major? He asked. David stood slowly, nodded once. Granted. General Wallace turned toward the crowd. My name is General Thomas Wallace, he said, voice deep and clear. And I've come here today not to give a speech, but to tell the truth. General. Wallace stepped forward, his gaze sweeping across the stunned room. Some of you may know Sergeant Major David Turner as a quiet man, a father, a neighbor, perhaps even as someone forgettable. He let the words hang, just long enough for discomfort to settle in. What most of you don't know is that this man led one of the most dangerous operations during my command overseas. His team was ambushed, cut off and outnumbered 5-1. Not only did he bring every one of his men back alive, he carried 2 of them on his back while injured. A quiet gasp rippled through the rows. Wallace held up a small folder. These are his commendations: Bronze Star with Valor, Purple Heart, Distinguished Service Medal. All awarded, all earned, none of them displayed. He looked over at David. Because as he once told me, you don't serve to be seen. You serve because it's right. Wallace turned again to the audience. You think you know the people in your community. You think you can measure a man by how loud he is, or how still he stands. But I'm here to tell you, some of the greatest legacies walk through your doors without needing applause. He unfolded a sheet of paper. This is an essay submitted to your contest. It was chosen as the winner by the judges, until someone decided it wasn't the kind of story worth honoring. Paused. Looked at Principal Emery, who froze mid-shuffle near the podium. I'm going to read it anyway. Wallace began to read. They said my father was a nobody, but I watched him carry the weight of the world without ever asking for credit. I watched him speak without noise, lead without a stage, and serve without a banner. My father is the man. They didn't see, but he's the reason I do. As the words poured out, the auditorium went silent. No coughs, no whispers, only breath and truth. He didn't teach me how to win with power. He taught me how to win with dignity. That legacy isn't written in trophies. It's written in how you carry yourself when no one's watching. When Wallace finished, he looked up. No applause followed, not at first, only stillness. Then someone, in the back stood, clapped once, then again. More hands joined. The sound rose, slow but certain, until the room thundered with applause. Amari sat frozen. He felt their eyes, not pitying this time, not dismissive. Watching him, seeing him, his classmates looked at him with something new in their eyes. And then David stepped forward. In full uniform now. Silent, composed. He walked to Amari, put a firm hand on his shoulder, and looked him in the eyes. You gave me my voice back. Amari swallowed hard, nodding through the tears. And for the first time in a long time, he felt seen. The following week felt like the air had changed. Fairhill Middle didn't suddenly become a perfect place, but it was no longer the same. Principal Emery didn't return after the ceremony. A formal notice was sent out saying he was on administrative leave pending review. No further details were given, but nobody really needed them. Ms. Jennings stepped into a new role almost immediately, interim director of the school's diversity and equity curriculum. She didn't brag, she didn't gloat, she just got to work. And people started listening. In classrooms, conversations shifted. Students began asking questions they'd never thought to ask. Questions about what was missing from their history books. Questions about whose stories had gone untold. One girl from Amari's class, Sophia, the quiet one who always drew in the corners of her notebook, asked the art teacher if she could paint something for the hallway. 2 weeks later, a mural appeared. Outside the library, it was titled, Hidden Heroes. At the center was a silhouette of a soldier, not in battle but standing tall, holding a child's hand. The child's face wasn't visible, but the message was, We rise when we are seen. On the last day of the semester, the school held a small ceremony in the front lobby. Parents and students gathered to witness the unveiling of a new wall. It was called the Wall of Honor. Names of veterans who had passed. Through Fairhill's doors, students, staff, parents, etched into polished wood. Near the center, one name stood out, Sergeant Major David Turner. Amari stood beside his father as the cloth covering the plaque was lifted. No big speeches, no dramatic moments, just quiet respect. After the ceremony, one of Amari's teachers knelt beside him and said, I should have spoken up earlier. I'm sorry. Amari didn't say anything. He just nodded. Forgiveness wasn't the point. Being heard was. That night, back in his room, Amari opened his laptop and read through the online version of his essay, now published in the local paper. Below it were dozens of comments, some grateful, some emotional, some still angry. He didn't focus on those. He focused on the email from a student across town who wrote, I didn't think anyone else felt this way. Thank you. He closed the laptop, turned toward the small framed certificate on his nightstand. General, Wallace's personal commendation, gifted to him after the ceremony. Beside it, his father's original Army citation now sat in a black frame. Amari had asked to keep it there, not because it looked impressive, but because it reminded him where strength begins. Not in applause, not in awards, but in truth. The house was still. Amari lay in bed, the soft hum of the ceiling fan above him, his fingers traced the edge of the frame on his nightstand, the one with his father's name, his rank, his legacy. He thought back to that day in the garage, the oil-stained rag, the question he had asked. Who were you before all this? He knew. Now his father was never just a quiet man. He was a protector, a leader, a man who chose silence not out of fear, but out of grace. Amari had spent so much time wondering why his father stayed in the background, but now he understood. Because when truth walks in, the world has no choice but to stand still and listen. Sat up, pulled his notebook from the shelf, and flipped to a fresh page. At the top, he wrote, Youth Voices, Volume 1. Underneath, a space to speak when no one else will. A spark had been lit, and Amari wasn't going to let it go out. Not now. Not ever. Voiceover, final reflection. My dad never needed a stage, he never needed to shout, but the day he stood in uniform, shoulders square, name on his chest, truth in his silence, the world saw him, and they saw me too. Legacy doesn't live in applause, it lives in courage, and now, it lives in me.